doing here? Ontario's Ministry of Health has asked 7 more people to isolate in relation to a global hantavirus outbreak, though it says those individuals are considered low risk contacts. So that brings the total number of people who are being monitored by local public health units in the province to 10. Number of positive cases internationally has grown to 11, and that includes 3 deaths. The outbreak started on the cruise ship, the MV Hondius. No additional fatalities have been reported since May 2nd. All cases have been among the ship's passengers and crew. And joining us to talk about all of this and explain what we're seeing here and put it all in context is Raywat Deonandan. He is an epidemiologist at the University of Ottawa. Raywat, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
We hear about, a virus that is spreading that people have questions about. I know there's a kind of links back to COVID and darker times here. So I just wanted to kind of put this in context. What exactly is hantavirus and how long have we known about it?
So Hantavirus is a family of viruses, actually, and you get it from coming into contact with rodent excreta, most typically rodent feces. And imagine you are sweeping up your shed or your barn or something, and some dried rodent droppings are there, and it becomes aerosolized in the air, and you inhale it, and that's how you get it. We've known about it for many decades now, and it's been in the world probably for millions of years. The thing is, there are 2 big families of hantavirus. There's the Old World, which is Europe and Asia, and the New World, which is in the Americas. And almost all the cases, 99% of the cases, are Old World. In fact, 90% of hantavirus cases are in China. But there's a difference in these 2 diseases. The Old World tends to be a renal disease, a kidney disease, and it has a chance of killing you between 1 and 15%, which is horrifying. But the New World type is mostly a respiratory, pulmonary, breathing disease, and it's got a much higher chance of killing you, about 30 to 40%.
And it sounds like this is even a further strain. The Andes virus, I believe. Can you explain how that's different from kind of the most of the strains that we've seen at some points?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, the
Yeah, no
Andes
problem.
substrain of the New World type is the only one that we know of that can be transmitted from person to person. Everything else, all the other hantavirus types, you only get it from direct contact with the rodent poop. But with the Andes strain, one person might get it from the contact with rodent stuff, and then a close physical contact of that person, like a spouse, a sexual partner, a caregiver. That's the kind of person who might get it from the original case. Now, there is a famous super spreader event that we always talk about when we think about hantavirus, where somebody with the Andes strain went to a big event, and a few other people at that event got infected. So that's what gives some people some concern, that there are opportunities for more casual spread if the circumstances are correct. But every other circumstance that we know of, it's been quite difficult to spread it person to person, the Andes strain.
So when we're looking at this current outbreak, and given what you've said about the main one of the main drivers, being around rodent droppings or what have you, this is happening on a cruise ship. What do we know about how this started? Does it make sense that it would be in a place that is contained like a cruise ship? Could it have happened before somebody brings it on? Just what's your read on how this got to this point to begin with?
Yeah, cruise ships in general are floating petri dishes. I mean, every year you get stories of norovirus outbreaks on cruise ships. It's not unusual. What is unusual in this case is a very fatal disease. So my understanding is that some unfortunate individuals went on an excursion in Argentina when they got off the cruise ship and encroached into an endemic area. And I think they went bird watching, and maybe they inhaled some rodent droppings that way. And when they got back on the boat, the outbreak began. It is unclear whether everybody on that ship was directly exposed to the actual rodent stuff, or whether some people got it as secondary contacts of the individuals who got on board. That's what makes this scientifically interesting. It's an opportunity to investigate the real extent of person-to-person transmission in an enclosed ship. And the other administratively interesting part of this is this international contact tracing adventure. We've got cases in the US, Canada, and Europe all being traced and contained using different protocols. So just because something is scientifically interesting and administratively interesting, it doesn't mean it's necessarily impactful on the population.
It's one thing I was also trying to make clear in that sense of providing some much valuable context to this because for to make this as basic as possible, this is not COVID-19, Ray White.
It's not. Now, I said earlier that it's difficult to get this disease. I should use my words more carefully. It's not as easy to get it as, say, COVID or the flu or measles. This is not an airborne disease in the way that most people understand airborne to be. There's always going to be a airborne component, an aerosolized component to this. So simply walking by a person with this disease isn't going to give it to you. Sharing the same room for a few minutes isn't going to give it to you. And we know who the cases are. They're all the people on the boat. So it's simply a matter of asking those people who are on the boat to quarantine for a period of time. And that period of time tends to be 6 to 8 weeks or so to make sure no symptoms arise. We also, we typically don't see people spreading this disease before they're symptomatic. So that gives us some confidence in the ability to contain it. This is not something the public needs to worry about unnecessarily. I want to remind people that globally we see between 10,000 and 200,000 cases of hantavirus every year. Now, 99% of those are, the old world variety, but it's not something that public health is unused to dealing with. In Canada, in the last 30 years, we've seen over 100 cases. Most of those domestically or of domestic origin, typically in Western Canada, people, again, sweeping up their barns or their sheds and getting infected that way. The USA has seen 1,000 cases in the last 30 years, and a handful of those have been the Andes strain. So it's not something that's completely alien to us. What is new here is the media focus on the fact that a handful of people have come back off a ship, and we know that they're isolating or quarantining in places in Canada. So all they have to do is to not be in touch with the general population for a few weeks and see if symptoms arise. If symptoms do arise, then we hope that our medical interventions can benefit them. But I do not expect this disease to move beyond, at best, the first order contacts of these individuals.
And I believe the World Health Organization said this week that they believe that this is contained at some point. They'll give it a few weeks, but they do believe that it is contained. The incredibly remote locations kind of involved here with the ship kind of stopping in these locations. Does that remoteness make it the outbreak? Does that make it harder or easier to kind of contain?
Well, I don't think it has any bearing on the containment of this. The threat of spread is from the individuals who got infected and the fact that they're in different countries now. They are contained. We know who they are. It's not mysterious. They're people who are on the boat. They can be identified and they can be observed and quarantined. The remoteness is interesting on a different level. We're at a point in history now where there are so many people and we are encroaching increasingly on these previously unexplored parts of the world that necessarily expose us to diseases that we're not used to being exposed to. And the threat of climate change also is moving the host behavior, like the rodent behavior. So we're in a new paradigm of what's called zoonotic spillover. That's when these animal diseases are more likely to spill over and infect people because of our movement and because of climate change. That's what's interesting here, beyond the international contact tracing adventure. This is not a public health emergency to my mind. I will change my tune if I see something called tertiary transmission. That's when a contact of the initial cases spreads it to other people. That's when we know we've got ongoing onward transmission, and that is highly unlikely to happen.
Very interesting nonetheless, but that idea, and this isn't just for hantavirus, but as the globe warms up, you see things that just in general, you're going to see things that generally aren't in some places. And I'm talking about, rodents or birds, or you know what I mean? There's other ecological examples here of this kind of spreading and other things just kind of being in places that they not normally are, which could have an impact on a wide variety of things, like the thing that we're talking
100%. Look, the big thing is mosquitoes. They're changing
Mm.
their migratory behavior quite noticeably. So dengue fever, malaria, they are popping up in new places, and we expect to see them in even newer places as climates and weather systems change. So buckle in, people. We're
Yeah,
in for an
yeah.
adventure this century.
You really know how to sell a vacation here. But the a couple of quick ones for you because you mentioned Canada is not immune to this. This is something that we have seen like 100 cases. What's kind of the typical fatality rate? Like how do often do we see these worst cases in this in these scenarios?
Sadly, the fatality rate is a third to a half. And there is no cure. There is a vaccine for the old world variety. South Korea created something called Hantavirus, which has like a 75% efficacy, but that vaccine does not apply to the new world type of this disease. And there are some vaccines being trialed. It doesn't seem to be a priority for much of the world because it's a quote unquote rare disease. It doesn't have quite the same population health priority or urgency. So we treat it syndromically and symptomatically. If you treat the symptoms, then you've got a fair chance of getting through this. So it is a scary disease. I mean, COVID had a 1% chance of killing you, and that was terrifying at a population level. This disease has a 30 to 40% chance. So if you get it, I'd be worried, but your chances of getting it are extremely low.
It's a good distinction, even though the fatality rate was less, but it was more easily transmissible, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So
Yeah.
you have to distinguish between population threats and individual threats. COVID was an enormous population threat. This disease, if you get it, is a substantial individual threat, but it's not a population threat.
In from a perspective of as you mentioned we have seen cases here in the past. This isn't necessarily new in some ways. Farmers and things like that should hikers, campers, peoples in rural areas take precautions here, or is that even kind of beyond what we kind of need to talk about in terms of worrying about this too much?
I think it's always safe to, if you're going to be in contact with rodent excreta, wear a mask. That'll help enormously. But in general, the risk is low. However, if you're in an endemic area known for large rodent populations, then just avoid contact with the poop. Like I said, the number of cases in Canada is about 100 in the last 30 years. This is not substantial. It's not something that should occupy a lot of your brain power at the moment. However, if you are in an area where this stuff does pop up every now and then, and your job is sweeping up the shed or the barn, wear some sort of respiratory protection, and that will reduce your risk to near zero.
Yeah, all useful context. I guess the last one for you. In talking about all this, what's perhaps the one thing you wish the public understood about hantavirus that's kind of getting lost in the coverage here, and maybe it's something you've already touched on.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is the distinction between something being scientifically and administratively interesting and being worthy of occupying your thought are two different things. And the second thing is understanding the difference between population risk and individual risk. With COVID, again, very low, well, comparatively low individual risk. If you get it, you're probably going to live. But the 1% fatality rate meant that it was a threat to the population. With this disease, you're probably not going to get it. If you do get it, you probably should be a little bit worried. So that's a difficult distinction even for some doctors to understand, some medical doctors, because we're so focused on individual risk all the time, we forget about population dynamics. But one of the challenges here is that the public has been conditioned to distrust public health as a result of the COVID pandemic. And we have to win back that trust with clear communication and transparency. And my bit of transparency here is I'm not a medical doctor. I don't know about the treatment necessarily. But what I do know is that all the evidence so far points to this not being a pandemic threat. That will change if it mutates and becomes more transmissible, but there's no sign of that happening anytime soon.
No, clear communication from science communicators is what we need, and that's what you've exactly provided here. Raywat, thanks so much for joining us on this. I really appreciate it.
It is my exquisite pleasure. Thank you.